Welcome to the fifth hearing of the Select Committee inquiry into the government's management of the Powerhouse Museum and other museums and cultural projects in New South Wales. The inquiry is examining issues surrounding the government's proposal for the Powerhouse Museum and support for the state's museums and cultural sector more broadly. Before I commence, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders past and present of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present. This morning we will hear from government witnesses from the arts and infrastructure portfolios, including the Honourable Don Harwin MLC, followed by the Chairman of Western Sydney Powerhouse Museum Community Alliance. After lunch, we hear evidence from the CFMEU, a flood expert and a Parramatta councillor. Before we commence, I would like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's hearing is being broadcast live via the Parliament's website. A transcript of today's hearing will be placed on the committee's website when it becomes available. In accordance with broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish before the committee's about the committee's proceedings. It is important to remember that parliamentary privilege does not apply to what witnesses may say outside their evidence at the hearing, and so I urge witnesses to be careful about any comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence, as such comments would not be protected by parliamentary privilege if another person decided to take an action for defamation. The guidelines for the broadcast of proceedings are available from the Secretariat. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand. In the circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. I remind everyone here today that the committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. I therefore request that witnesses focus on the issues raised by the inquiry terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. Witnesses are advised that any messages should be delivered to the committee members through the committee staff. To aid in the audibility of this hearing, may I remind both committee members and witnesses to speak into their microphones. I now welcome our first witnesses. Minister, I remind you that you do not need to be sworn, as you have already sworn an oath to your office as a member of Parliament. Similarly, Ms Foy and Mr Draper, you have both already been sworn for this inquiry. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement?
Yes, Chair, and as I've of course appeared before the committee in late July, I'll try and keep my remarks brief, although there have been one or two things the committee should be brought up to date with since then. Obviously, it is now a matter of record that the Minister for Planning approved this state significant development application for the Powerhouse at Parramatta, and it's now moving into its delivery stage, and indeed some very preliminary work commenced on the site at 7:30 this morning. In the immediate term, the project is going to create 4,000 jobs, and it's going to inject hundreds of millions of dollars into the economy that will really help the state power through economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. When it's complete, it's projected to attract 2 million visitors each year to Parramatta, injecting millions of tourist dollars into Western Sydney. Also, and this is important, up to 10,000 regional students will come to stay at the museum every year through the Academy program. And that's very significant also for school students right across regional New South Wales who have that capacity for the first time in one of our cultural institutions. With a focus on science and technology, Powerhouse Parramatta will be the museum's flagship and an incredible opportunity for the community to engage with the revered Powerhouse collection. And really our government's commitment to cultural infrastructure is without recent precedent. And we are absolutely committed to this once-in-a-generation investment in our cultural infrastructure. I'd remind the committee that already the Powerhouse is operating on 3 sites. including the Powerhouse at Ultimo, the museum's Discovery Centre at Castle Hill, and also the Sydney Observatory. The total net New South Wales Government capital contribution to Powerhouse Parramatta and the expansion of the museum's Discovery Centre is $840 million. This is proof that the New South Wales Government remains absolutely committed to establishing an iconic, vibrant, interactive, world-class cultural institution in Parramatta to further grow and promote an accessible and diverse arts and cultural environment across Western Sydney. Regarding Willow Grove, I note that throughout the planning process and at previous hearings of the committee, some have raised concerns. I'd like to remind the committee that the selected design from the design excellence process did not retain the locally listed Willow Grove building. I'd also like to remind the committee Willow Grove has been unused for many years, and after many additions and alterations, it does not reflect its original state. However, in response to the concerns of the community, we've committed to relocating Willow Grove to another area within the Parramatta local government area. While it cannot be retained on site, we will retain Willow Grove and return it to the community and protect it for future generations. This decision is about getting the best possible outcome for the Western Sydney community. It's a balance between delivering Western Sydney a world-class cultural institution and retaining much-loved local heritage items. Relocation will allow the building to be more accessible to the local community to use it, and it will allow Western Sydney to realise its long-awaited cultural institution with a high-quality design, one that Western Sydney deserves. The dismantling of Willow Grove is subject to details, conditions of consent. The dismantling will be supervised by a qualified heritage consultant, and the future use of Willow Grove will be subject to community consultation and planning approvals. The cost of the proposed relocation will be confirmed once further planning work is completed. We've been able to retain the original aspects of St George's Terrace in place and are working through how to best integrate them into the operations of the new museum, if that's what the community want. The opportunity for the Powerhouse Parramatta to harness this growth to contribute to the greater productivity and livability of Western Sydney more broadly is truly transformational. On the 4th of July last year, I was absolutely delighted to announce with the Treasurer that the New South Wales Government's committed to keeping the Powerhouse Museum at Ultimo open. It's a decision I'm sure that this committee welcomes. The decision to retain and renew Ultimo, in addition to establishing the new flagship at Parramatta, will allow us to provide two world-class museums for the communities of New South Wales and significantly increase access to an exhibition of the internationally renowned collections of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences Trust. The final business case, investigating a range of options for Powerhouse Ultimo, was completed at the end of 2020 and is currently under consideration by government, going through all of the normal processes that I've outlined to the House and which I'm sure committee members are familiar with, that are required in any of these sorts of projects before an investment decision is made. The New South Wales Government is committed to retaining the Powerhouse Museum at Ultimo as part of a creative industries precinct. Retaining this site as a creative industries precinct is critical to cementing Sydney's reputation as Australia's cultural capital while investing in one of the fastest growing economic sectors in the state. New South Wales Government has developed a high-level precinct-based master plan for the site in collaboration with the Powerhouse that has informed the final business case. This master plan fully engages with the precinct surrounding the site and ensures that it remains at the centre of Ultimo's future. Throughout the process, a variety of options have been investigated through consultation with the cultural and creative industries, including several curatorial and master planning workshops to inform a decision on the best use of the site. In closing, I'm proud of the decision to build the Western Sydney fit-for-purpose iconic museum. I'm proud of our record cultural infrastructure spend, particularly in these challenging times when the state needs economic stimulus. 2 world-class museums in Parramatta and Ultimo will provide a significant boost for the cultural and tourism sectors in New South Wales, and it is a great outcome for New South Wales. Now, I would just make one final point that, unlike previous hearings, Lisa Havilah is appearing separately, so some of the matters on which she is more able to help you than I am, or Ms Foy or Mr Draper, will suggest that you ask her as she immediately follows us. Thank you.
Questions?
Mr. Chair, thank you. And Minister, thank you for your opening statement. You mentioned in your opening statement that you were proud of the Powerhouse. If you're so proud of the Powerhouse decision and announcements, why did you sneak out the announcement late Friday afternoon and refuse to do interviews all weekend about this matter?
Well, that's just simply nonsense. I didn't sneak anything out. Minister Stokes is the person who makes decisions on state significant development applications, not me. The timing was a matter for him, not me.
It was approved, according to the website, signed by the Minister February the 11th, a project that will cost between $840 million, $1.5 million, and the government doesn't even issue a press release, and it's only brought to the community's attention by the community groups.
Mr. Secord, if you check, you'll find out the press release was issued by Minister Stokes, which had comment in it from me and also from the member for Parramatta, Mr. Jeff Lee.
It was brought to the community's attention by the community groups. Now,
well,
if you're so proud of this project,
that's just not true. I made the point in response. The government did make an announcement last Friday.
At 5:45 in the afternoon, very late in the afternoon, sneak it out on a late Friday afternoon. I thought that you would be trumpeting this announcement from the rooftops if you were so proud of it. Now tell me.
As I said, if you have any further questions about that, you should refer them to Minister Stokes. It was his decision when it was announced.
Did you ask him?
Not mine.
Did you ask him whether you two might do a stand-up together so that you had the opportunity of talking to the media? When he said, Minister Harwin, would you like to have comment in my press release? Did you say, geez, it's quite late on a Friday, Minister Stokes, perhaps we might find a more opportune time to promote this announcement of which we're so proud?
Look, with great respect, Rose, I have done many media conferences on this project. It was a DA. Right? I'm pleased it's over. It's going ahead. I was in Parramatta and talking to the media in Parramatta just the week before last.
Minister,
it's just gross exaggeration. It's more of a reflection, frankly, on how Labor work.
Minister,
that's your priority in terms of the first questions you're asking.
It's about scrutiny, Mr. Minister.
With great respect, having a press conference is not about scrutiny. Scrutiny is about me fronting up and asking whatever questions you want asked today.
Minister,
and so far, all you're asking me about is media strategy, which I just find extraordinary.
All we get from you when we ask questions is referral to other people. We ask about this announcement, ask Minister Stokes. In our July hearing, we said the announcement in which the Ultimo site was being kept, ask Minister Perrottet. When are you going to be able to answer any questions about the decisions about this project?
Don't be silly. I've been at hearings of this committee on at least 4 occasions asking questions, answering questions on them. I answer them with estimates. I answer them in Parliament. I answer them all the time, Rose, and it really is just...
Minister, you hid all weekend, and when you had media inquiries yesterday, you referred them to Infrastructure New South Wales.
I am a resident of country New South Wales. I was not in Sydney. Right. I also had on Friday things that I needed to do in Newcastle, so I wasn't available. On Saturday, it was I had to do the Blake Prize out at Casula Powerhouse. Over the weekend, it was my mother's 83rd birthday. She's not in good health, and I wanted to spend time with her. That was my decision.
Minister, putting aside your mother, and I extend any sympathies or any concerns about your mother, but this is a $1.5 billion project. I would expect the minister would be out there in the community explaining it, trumpeting it from the rooftops, not slipping it out at a Friday afternoon and then hiding from the media all weekend.
I've answered that question, Walt. I reject your characterisation of it. And I might also say you're trying to slip in the $1.5 billion
Okay, well, let's go down this track.
Which is wrong.
Okay,
and I have repeatedly answered questions.
What is now
every
the cost?
time
Okay, Minister,
the net contribution that the government will be making to this project is, as I said in my opening statement, I've already addressed it, $840 million.
Now, that figure of $840 million, does that change with the 188 conditions attached to the project on Friday afternoon? How does that affect the funding of the project?
$840 million is the amount that the Expenditure Review Committee of Cabinet has said that I have to spend on this project. I will, no doubt, of course, Infrastructure New South Wales will consider those conditions very carefully, and if they have any comment to make in that respect, they'll give me advice.
Well,
Simon, is there anything you'd like to add at this stage? Or
Mr. Draper, the 188 conditions added on, how does that affect the government's claim, $840 million for the project? Does that change the cost of the project?
I think our initial assessment would be that they would have no impact on the cost of building the project, those conditions. 188
new conditions on the project. Okay, what is the cost of the relocation of Willow Grove? Now, we've heard, or demolition of Willow Grove, or the dismantling of Willow Grove. What is the cost? We've heard $10 to $20 million. What is the cost?
Well, you haven't heard those numbers from us or from anybody else who's familiar with the project, I suspect. That's numbers that have been speculated by other people. Look, the cost of relocating Willow Grove will be known once we complete the methodology plan that we're required to complete under the conditions. And then we go to tender, we get a price for that from builders who are going to firstly dismantle and store, and then secondly reconstruct at a new location. So there's quite a lot of work to be done. I believe that for a start, that relocation was not part of it's included in the conditions, but it was something that we offered to the department. It wasn't something new. It was something that we proposed in our response to the submissions report. So that's not a change that's come out that would affect the cost of the project.
So you tell me, you're at Infrastructure New South Wales. The government has publicly committed to dismantling, demolishing, or relocating Willow Grove. Did you take off on that decision, on the processes behind that decision?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, what I'm trying to get to is that you must have done some calculations on the cost. What will be the cost to dismantle, relocate, or demolish Willow Grove? You must know.
Well, I think what I've just said answers your question. That is, we will know the cost of that process accurately when we've gone through the process of finalising a methodology plan, which the conditions of consent require us to do before any works are done on Willow Grove. That has to be approved by the Secretary of the Department of Planning before we can do any works at all on Willow Grove. That's a very involved process. We have to then appoint builders. We have to work through that process. And we have to know where it's going to be relocated to in the long term. That will take some time. Mr. Secord, I just want to put this in context. Infrastructure New South Wales advised the government, and the government has adopted this policy, that we don't make premature announcements about costs and timetables for projects before they're advanced enough to do so. That's just counterproductive. It's counterproductive for teams, it's counterproductive for the construction industry, and to be absolutely honest, it's counterproductive for the community who then gets incorrect information when things are announced far too early.
But it's also counterproductive for accountability, isn't it? Because if you can't give us any even rough figure as to how much this component of the project is going to cost? How can we hold the government accountable if that rough figure doubles or triples or more? If we have no idea how much that's going to cost, how can we hold the government accountable to ensure that it's being done efficiently and effectively?
Well, because the government has announced the budget for the whole project, and anything we do on the works for Willow Grove in terms of relocation needs to operate within that budget.
So you are giving us a guarantee that the relocation, the dismantling, the relocation, whatever happens to Willow Grove will be entirely contained within the $840 million envelope for the Parramatta Powerhouse project?
With respect, I've already said that. Already today in this hearing and previously.
And so I suppose, what if the cost of that project, as you've said, there are a lot of unknowns. Haven't done the scoping studies, don't even know the site that it's going to go. There are a lot of things that are unknown. What if the cost of that ends up being very considerable? What if the cost of that component ends up being within tens of millions of dollars, which is quite possible? How will that affect other elements of the project?
We're not saying that it will affect other elements of the project at all. So obviously when we develop a project and design, we operate contingency, and we know there are going to be things that happen in the course of implementing a project which can't be foreseen in the design process, and so we operate with contingencies, and we would expect to be able to absorb those costs within any contingencies we hold for the project.
What is the contingency?
Well, have you finished on this line for the moment?
I was just going to ask what the contingency is.
Can I just ask one question about the budget? The Minister said in his...
Are we not doing allocated? I'm sorry.
No, we're just doing free-flowing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just checked.
apologize.
I moved that motion about
Sorry, I apologise. I didn't realise.
The Minister said $828 million?
840 million
800
is the net government contribution.
Right,
to
that's
the
what I thought you...
project that
840
ERC
net.
decided upon.
Can you tell us what the gross, what contributions came in and how it all ends up at 840 million?
Yes, I'll just get that note for you. Thank you. Right, so the approved capital investment is $840 million. Then we are spending an additional $5 million, which is related, which is the Ultimo business case, although that's not strictly speaking Parramatta. Then on top of the $840 million, there will be a philanthropy contribution of $75 million, which makes in total a cost of $915 million.
Could I ask you, Minister?
That is the total capital budget.
Could I ask you, Minister, how much of the $75 million of philanthropic donations has been received to date?
In terms of received,
Bank.
None of it's in the bank yet, but they're making excellent They're making excellent progress.
Wasn't the call for philanthropic donations announced at the end of 2019? Have multiple media reports from 2019, if that's any help.
Yes, but look, I'm entirely comfortable with the progress that is being made.
Minister,
progress is being made very quickly on this.
Minister, the call for philanthropic donations is now about a year and a half old. You want to get $75 million and you haven't got one single cent.
Well, David,
how can you say that's going well?
What you seem to ignore and what you seem to be overlooking is the record that the arts portfolio has in terms of obtaining philanthropic support for its cultural program. I want to finish this, David.
No, do.
Right? Our credibility is extremely strong on this. We have completed the Walsh Bay 4-5 project with philanthropic with 100% of the philanthropic targets met. 2-3 is going ahead with the targets proceeding as planned, and over $100 million has been pledged for Sydney Modern, and it's coming in. When we say we are going to do this, we do this. And when I say that I am comfortable with the progress that's being made, I know what I'm talking about. I have every reason to be confident about how that's going.
Well, Minister, you acknowledge not a single dollar has been paid into an account yet.
But that's different to pledges, surely. That doesn't mean that nothing's happened.
How much?
Well, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. Minister, you acknowledge not a single dollar has been paid in.
I have absolutely no intention of making premature remarks about the philanthropic campaign until we are ready. We have a strategy. Our other cultural institutions have. I could also talk about the enormous amount of.
Your own government members are asking how much has been pledged. So I'll ask again, how much has been pledged?
Not what I was asking. I was explaining the difference between money in the bank and pledges, David, which you obviously don't understand.
Tell us about the pledging.
I am telling you. I've told you about Walsh Bay. I've told you about the Art Gallery. I could now tell you about the State Library. I could then proceed to tell you about the Australian Museum. Even the National Arts School is now well and truly into fundraising as well.
This is a powerhouse inquiry. How much has been pledged?
I will make an announcement on that when I am ready to make an announcement. I am very comfortable with how it's going.
We want to be very comfortable. So could you give us any more information about any work, or if you say you have a strategy, what is the strategy?
There is a team at the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences Trust that are working on this and have been working all year to identify donors, and there are a number of them, and I can assure you we're making extremely good progress.
We may have some further questions of Ms. Havilah and Mr. Collins in that regard, but Minister, first of all, I acknowledge everyone has family issues on the weekend, and I'm not going to take issue with you doing that. I myself was late this morning because of family issues, so it happens to all of us, and I accept your explanation. But can I ask you about the actual building cost? Previous business cases had put the building costs of the Parramatta project at about $1.17 billion. You're now putting to us that it can all be done in an envelope of $915 million. How has it got cheaper?
I'll invite Mr. Draper to talk about that. The total government, so the current total capital budget is as I described it, and that is what I've been advised. Simon, is there anything you want to add from that? I might say there have been so many figures bandied around, sometimes, it's better just to go to the source of truth.
Well, just to be clear, so Mr. Draper knows where I'm getting this from. It's from the 2018 economic analysis produced, I think, by both your department and Infrastructure New South Wales, and it had the cost at $1.17 billion.
Yeah. Look, all I can really say is that we've got a scope of works that fits within the budget that we've been given, which is the budget that the Minister's outlined just earlier this morning. This is a project with a very long history, and as the Minister said, all sorts of numbers have been flagged at different times for different scopes of works. The project that has just been through a planning consent process, which has been, and as Ms Jackson was saying, this is very open. This is very transparent. It's been through a lengthy planning process. The design and the scope that has been on exhibition and has now been approved by the Minister is designed to work within the budget that the Minister has outlined. I can't really comment on those earlier figures or the scope.
David, I might be able to help you with one aspect of your question. You've quoted from a 2018 report.
Yes. I was going to whether or not it includes
the 2018 report was before the design competition commenced and was more than 12 months before the winning design was announced. Infrastructure New South Wales only assumed responsibility for the project in December 2019. So whatever costings you may be referring to from 2018 was pre-design and goes back to the exact point that Simon was making earlier about figures given too early. right, until you have a design and until you've done some of the work that follows a design, you're really in no position to be able to make a statement about the total capital investment budget for a project. Now, you might come up with an estimate, but really in this case, the figure is what it is, and that's what how we're delivering it.
So was when the design went out, were they given the budget? Were they told you have to design a project within this budget, or was it just sort of a magical symmetry between the design competition and the budget?
I wasn't involved in the design competition, but what I understand they were given was a budget in terms of the space allocation, so how big the building needed to be. So we had a budget around the size of the building because the government had made public commitments around that. Correct. So they were given a brief that went along those lines, but to be absolutely honest, should a group of architects come in and tell us how much a building was going to cost, we probably would want to double check that in any case.
All right. So are you saying you have some kind of assessment that the approved design, the design that's got planning approval, will fit within this capital budget of $915 million? You've got that assessment somewhere?
Yes.
Where?
Well, that's how we've built up our internal budgets. What do you mean by where?
Show me the document, the assessment, the analysis that says that can be built for $915 million. Where is it?
Well, we clearly haven't published that. We're in the middle of a tender process with a number of builders. We don't have the habit then of publishing our breakdown, our detailed cost breakdown with when we're in a highly sensitive commercial process with building contractors.
The $915 million is just the capital works, is that right?
Capital investment.
Well,
it's not the
capital works.
If you're asking, is that the cost of actually building the building? It's more than just building the building.
Well,
it's the cost of the project, including what precedes, if you like, the building of the building, and then what follows that, which is the commissioning of the museum and the work that's done inside the museum by the museum. Am I right, Simon?
I thought you said capital investment.
Yeah. Sorry?
I thought the figure you gave was $950 million in capital investment.
Yeah.
I assume that includes all the consultants that have been paid to date?
Yes, that's correct.
How much has been paid to date to consultants?
Well, when you say consultants, we're really talking about architects and engineers and those sorts of participants, planning advisors, people who do specialist reports for the EIS process, etc. We've been up until the end of December about $20 million, or Infrastructure New South Wales has spent that amount. There may have been other amounts.
But Infrastructure New South Wales only came on in December of last year. And you've already spent $20 million on consultants.
Yeah, and in that time frame we have done the detailed investigation and design of a large complex building and run a very exhaustive consultation and planning approval process. So that's not surprising at all for a building of that scale.
So, Minister, $20 million has been spent on consultants since December of last year to now. How much was spent in the years before that on consultants, and is that part of the capital investment figure?
Just a minute, I'll just seek the advice of my tutors. Do we have the pre-construction New South Wales costs? So I've been advised by my Deputy Secretary that between mid-2017, which was the point where we effectively got the permission to proceed by ERC, and November 2020, which would also therefore include the costs that Mr. Draper has just been referring to. The approximate cost is $25.7 million in total.
Sorry, that's $25.7 million from your department?
No, that includes the Infrastructure New South Wales spend.
How much?
That's the figure that I've been given by the Deputy Secretary.
How much of the Infrastructure New South Wales $20 million consultants have happened since November 2020, Mr. Draper?
Well, my figure was at the end of December, so I would imagine it would be quite a small fraction, if much. It would be quite a small amount. I haven't got that number to hand.
Give us the updated figures to now.
Perhaps, David, it might be best if we take that on notice.
Yes, if you both do, that would be good.
If you can precise figure. But in terms of what you've got the general, the broad brush picture. Okay.
I do want to go to the relocation costs. The different estimates that have been provided by museum experts, collection experts, have put the relocation costs at astronomical figures. What is your assessment of the relocation costs? And is that included in the $950 million?
Just to clarify, are you talking about the relocation of Willow Grove or the collection?
I'm talking about the collection here. We'll do Willow Grove separately.
Yeah, because it would be appropriate that we take that on notice at the moment.
It's not included in the capital investment though, is it?
Yes, it is.
So if the relocation costs are $20, $50, $100 million, the museum just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. As Willow Grove costs increase, the museum gets smaller and smaller and smaller. You can't keep taking from the same pie.
We're not taking from the same pie. It was all included from day one. And that's why I stick to what I say, which is that the net cost to government of building the Powerhouse Museum, including things such as the collection move and the money that has been spent on the Ultimo business case, will not exceed $840 million.
With respect, Minister, it wasn't all included from day one, because the relocation of Willow Grove, for example, which is potentially going to cost tens of millions of dollars, is within the $840 million envelope and was a very recent inclusion in the project.
Thank you. I accept that, Rose. I also accept that in relation to St George's Terrace, but that matter's been covered earlier by Mr Draper.
Minister, are you confident that all concerns about flooding have been taken into consideration at the Parramatta site?
Yes.
What do you base that on?
Based on the fact that the state significant development approval has been given. Well,
I'll take you to that approval. Well, it seems that the planning department doesn't share your views.
I don't think that characterisation is
maybe
fair,
I'll read
Mr.
to you
Secord.
recommendation E32. Prior occupation and commencement of the use of the development, a suitably qualified consultant is to undertake a detailed flood damages assessment to assess the likely intangible and tangible damages for the museum collection across a full range of flood events.
Could you give us just the number of the condition again?
E32, it was one of the 180 recommendations. And the assessment will review the acceptable probability of the loss or damage to categories of the museum contents by the curators, taking into account the various values. So, how much?
Look, I have been given a high-level briefing on the conditions of consent by Infrastructure New South Wales and the museum director. I beg your pardon?
And was flooding included in that briefing?
It's obviously a large project. There are detailed conditions of consent, but the feeling of both Infrastructure New South Wales and the museum is that many or most of the conditions are exactly the sort of conditions that you'd expect for a project of this nature. And they are comfortable with them. But I'll invite Mr Draper to respond specifically to the matter you've raised.
Yeah, thanks, Minister. Thanks, Mr Secord. That condition is really quite standard. So what they're saying there is, when you go through a planning process, first you get a planning consent, then you get a construction certificate which allows you to commence construction, and then before you occupy the building, further requirements. And all along the way, there are requirements of producing more information for the planning department before you can get an approval to occupy the building. That condition goes to the occupancy certificate certificate and deals with the question of how the building will be operated, how the exhibits will be protected and exhibited at the time. Something we can't know right now as we're building the building. This is something that will the occupiers of the building, the operators of the building, will have to produce at that time. It's very, very standard.
Mr. Draper, I put it to you that it is not standard. It's very specific. It talks about the museum contents. It talks about employing a consultant to assess that.
It's very standard. It's very standard for a building to be approved without really there being any concerns about the inherent nature of the building. It's very standard for the planning conditions to include steps to be taken during the course of the construction process and prior to occupancy. That is very, very standard.
Is it true that there will be levels of the museum where there will be unoccupied because of flood possibilities?
If I may, Chair, I'll just contribute first to that, and then if Mr. Draper wants to add, he's of course most welcome to. There have been reports along the lines that you've suggested. Yes. They are untrue. The only part of the building which is referred to in that way is the undercroft. The undercroft was designed specifically as a measure to assist in the management of floods.
What is undercroft?
The undercroft.
What does undercroft mean?
I'll perhaps let Mr. Draper remark upon that in his supplementary answers, if you like. But let me be clear. Those comments did not relate to any of the exhibition spaces, none of them. It was to the undercroft, and the undercroft is something that is Simon will do better at this than I will, but undercrofts are generally part of a design literally to help with the management of inundation of waters. It's very common in buildings. In fact, there was a house for sale recently in my village that had an undercroft specifically for that purpose. Anyway, Simon.
That's correct, Minister. So there's no part of, to answer your question directly, there's no part of the museum that is being found to be unsuitable for occupation for those reasons. The undercroft is a structure that we've designed into the development because the formation of the landscaping along the riverbank, if you like, can't result in waters backing up in the course of a river flood event. So that would affect
the whole valley.
That would affect the neighbours, people further upstream from the river. So that's designed to allow the water to flow through that part of the riverbank as it does today. We did think, well, we're building a structure there to allow that to happen. Wouldn't it be nice to make that available for other uses in the community? Now, others have said, look, that's not really something they would advise. We accept that, but that was a secondary idea. The primary idea was to ensure that there was a flood mitigation measure to prevent flooding upstream from the riverbank.
How much of the $915 million that you are putting forward as the figure will go towards flood mitigation and flood-related activity?
Look, I don't have a breakdown. I don't think we could even get a breakdown from the way we construct our costings, but it's just a standard part of the construction process on any site that you have to manage flows of water, whether it's river flooding in this case, or potentially overland flows of flooding. Any construction site includes allowances for that.
Does a figure exist on the impact and flood mitigation measures in your budget?
Sorry, I think we'll have to re-ask that one.
I guess what I'm trying to do is that if you do not have a figure at your fingertips involving the costs of flood mitigation, flood prevention, flood response, can you take it on notice and provide it to the committee?
But I think what Mr. Draper said, correct me if I'm wrong, is that literally the whole building has been designed to ensure there are no flood impacts, to actually identify any particular dollars in is probably a bit...
Yeah, it's just inherent to the design of the site.
That's the way the building's designed, to make sure there's no problem.
How about you, if you don't mind, how about you take it on notice to see if in fact there are figures or data that response that relate to flood mitigation at the site?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it on notice.
Well, it's not in a neutral context, Mr. Draper. You'd be aware that the detailed report by Stephen Molino the most preeminent flood expert for the Parramatta catchment, and particularly the CBD, pointed out the initial proposed plans were deeply hazardous, that the Undercroft was a gathering area for the community. It was going to flood. There was no way out. There was a risk to life and limb as a result of the original design. There was concerns about the scale of the building, blocking floodwaters moving down into the river, making escape routes impassable. These were very real concerns. I assume it's cost something to redesign to fix those, or have they not been fixed?
I think the primary change that's happened for the design for the Undercroft is that it won't be made available to the public. So originally we had intended to be an open area so that people could enter and egress at will, as they can on the rest of the riverbank. But what the concerns of Mr. Molino and people in the planning department and others has resulted in the idea that will now be enclosed with a screen so that people can't go into the Undercroft. That's the only change that's happened since then.
So it'll be a sort of an empty, neutral space confronting the riverfront?
Well, it'll be... well, I'm not sure we're by an empty neutral space, but it'll be a structure that's built, and it'll have a screen around it. I'm sure it'll look much better than the council car park that's there today, but it will be done. It'll be done as part of the landscaping plan that's been set up for the riverfront.
And what about the narrow egress on the western side of the site, which Mr. Molino said was prone to potential major flooding, particularly if the two drainage pipes that are proposed as the major flood solution get blocked? And we know, as you know, you should assume they will get blocked in a major river, in a major flooding event. What you address that dangerous escape route?
Yeah, you're referring now to overland flood events. So at the moment, the floodwaters go either side, east and west of the site, and that's what would happen in the event of the Powerhouse being completed as well. So there'll be no real change there. Dirraburry Lane there, I think you're referring to, is already a place where overland flows pass through that site. There'll be no worsening of that effect as a result of the construction of the Powerhouse. Mr. Molino did advocate, and the council also advocates, assuming that all the underground drainage systems are blocked. So that's something that's quite unusual. It's a very conservative assumption to make. It's not applied generally in other parts of Sydney or other parts of New South Wales. The report that the department did, its own assessment of the flooding reports, suggested that was a good sensitivity analysis to do, but shouldn't be your core assumption.
So you've rejected Mr. Molino's considered expert opinion that those major drainage pipes can be blocked in a flood event, and you've decided to carry on regardless.
No, we have accepted that there's a number of experts in this field. Now, Mr. Molino, I don't doubt his expertise whatsoever, but there's a number of, we've got a very good group of engineers working on our project as well. The department's commissioned their own engineers. It's been his comments have been reviewed, dealt with, and considered in the planning consent process, and it's been found that the design that we've come up with is acceptable and does not increase the risk of flood risk in Parramatta. In fact, the conditions will be very much the same as they are today. And it's worth noting that the conditions you're describing, should they eventuate, are not only an issue for our site, they would be affecting all of Parramatta and probably all of Sydney, because a rainfall event of that nature
Mr. Draper, you're proposing to build a new attraction site, which, if it goes well, will have thousands of people in it, which you'll need to rapidly evacuate in a flood, and your final design is contrary to the recommendations of Mr. Molino. That's the point, isn't it?
Let's make it quite, before, obviously, I'm not trying to shut off Mr. Draper, and he can also respond, but let's make it quite clear that arguably, the ground floor of the new museum which is at the level that's been approved, above the 1 in 1,000 year flood level, is one of the highest ground floors, arguably, of any building in Parramatta. I mean, some of the material that's gone out suggesting that people are in danger or that the collection is in danger is just simply wrong, David. Anyway,
Minister, I'm asking about people being able to safely evacuate the building in the case of a flood. And as I understand it, the design now has rejected the advice and the opinion of the preeminent flood expert for Parramatta. And that's
I think you're talking about two things, Mr. Shoebridge. On one hand, you're talking about the overland flows passing down the western side of the building to Dirraburry Lane. That would not, I mean, the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences will have to develop an emergency plan for those sort of circumstances, but that would not necessarily necessitate any evacuation. You'd have a passage of water passing down in those circumstances that Mr. Molino is concerned about, a passage of water passing down a particular stretch of the laneway, and that wouldn't require, but that doesn't mean that there's a generalised flood across all the lands in Parramatta, including the Powerhouse site.
We'll see what Mr. Molino says about that this afternoon.
Can I just ask a couple of follow-up questions about the relocation of Willow Grove? So under the conditions of consent that have been granted, specifically D1 that relates to this, the specific program of the relocation site, the relocation costs is not required to be provided until 12 months after the deconstruction of Willow Grove. Is that right?
There's a two-step process that the department set out, yes.
That's right. And so I suppose I'm seeking an assurance, Minister, that you guarantee that between step 1 and step 2 of that process, if the costs of the relocation, selecting the new site, become higher than you had anticipated and start to exceed the $840 million envelope, that you won't abandon the relocation altogether and suddenly just say it's too expensive?
No, it's very clear that the relocation is part of the consent, so we will be doing it. And that's the expectation that's
I appreciate
that is clearly there in Minister Stokes' approval and will be delivering.
I appreciate it's your expectation.
No, he said and will be delivering.
Well,
and look, with respect, Rose, you asked me before this question back in July last year. No, it might have been in the House after I made the announcement, and it might not have been you, so I apologise for that. But I've made it very clear we're going to do this.
I appreciate that.
Are going to do this.
I appreciate.
I've also given a public commitment that people will be in it and using it before the museum's finished.
Can you understand why there is some sort of community scepticism? Because we have the situation where prior to the last election, you and the Premier indicated that it was your hope and expectation that these buildings would be retained as part of the design. And then lo and behold, after the election, after everything's approved, Rose, that becomes impossible. And people are concerned that between stage 1 and stage 2...
Are you giving a speech or asking a question, Rose?
Well, I'm premising my question, requesting a guarantee with the reasons why people might not take... It is my hope and expectation that this occurs,
he's already
particularly
given that
seriously.
guarantee. It will be done, he said.
The Minister can answer his own question.
Well, he's answered it 3 times already.
Order.
So let's go for number 4.
Can you understand why there might be some scepticism?
No, I can't actually, because I've made it very clear I'm going to do it. And I'm very happy to do it, as a matter of fact. In fact, I was the one who offered to do it.
Minister, regarding Willow Grove...
To deal with community concern.
Regarding Willow Grove, have you met with the CFMMEU in relation to their green ban on that site?
No, personally I haven't. In fact, I had a meeting scheduled with Mr Greenberg, which he cancelled. But I know that Infrastructure New South Wales has been discussing that matter with him. So,
Mr Draper, what are the outcome of those discussions?
Look, we met with the CFMEU.
By the way, it's Greenfield.
Greenfield.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know how mixed it up. I must have been thinking about Todd Greenberg or something. I don't know.
I'm sure later today he'll get your name right too.
Yeah, look, we met with the senior officials of the CFMEU, including Mr Greenfield. I think that was back in August. They'd announced the green ban, I think, in June last year. So we met with them then as we were going through the EIS process, the consultation process, and really that was for us to explain why it was that we were approaching Willow Grove the way we were and St George's Terrace. And to be fair, they explained the discussions they'd had with the community, their commitment to preserving heritage. It was a perfectly amicable conversation, and I think we understood their position. We just tried to explain the practicalities of dealing with two heritage buildings on site, which in one case it has been possible to leave in situ because it's on the edge of the site, and that's, I think, the whole project team and works with us is very happy with that outcome. The Willow Grove building is in the middle of the site, and as we explained to the CFMEU at the time, it was simply not possible to keep it where it's currently located. And so we've come up with another solution, which we think is a good outcome, and particularly when you consider, I mean, you've all been, I know, to Willow Grove, and it's not the best environment for a heritage building. They're sort of squeezed in between car parks and 1970s office buildings, and it's in a state of has been somewhat unloved for quite a long time. We think the outcome that we're coming to will be a lot better.
With all respect, that wasn't the question. The question is, has the CFMEU come back to you and agreed that they will remove their green ban and allow you to use the either moving or demolition of that building as a premise for your budgetary processes?
Well, we don't usually go and ask the CFMEU how to manage our budget processes, but I don't think they would expect. Again, that. With respect, you gave evidence earlier saying that the project would cost an amount of money, and working on the assumption that it will go ahead, and so is the minister. But obviously, the CFMEU has a green ban on the site. What have you done, or Minister? What have you done to get that removed?
Well, I'm happy to go first. I've asked, let me make it quite clear that obviously with the government, with its record $100 billion plus infrastructure budget, relations between construction trade unions and the government and the contractors is very important, and I think it would be inappropriate, frankly, for one minister to go in there. I think it's best handled by Infrastructure New South Wales, who deal with all of the projects, to take, if you like, a helicopter view. That's the appropriate way. I don't think it would be responsible at all, frankly, for just one minister and just one project to try and intervene. And so, therefore, Simon, I've left it completely to Infrastructure New South Wales, so you might want to make some more comments about that.
I fail to understand the answer to that question, actually, but anyway.
Can you just remind me what the question was? Sorry, Chair.
I think the question was, what had the Minister done to try and lift the green ban? Do I understand that you're open to a meeting with the CFMEU and you'll bring along whatever other appropriate ministers are to try and talk
as was through? But they cancelled it. But my preference is that this should be handled on a whole of government. These issues should be handled on a whole of government basis by Infrastructure New South Wales.
So maybe to understand the question. So we met with the CFMEU.
You're working on the basis that the demolition or the removal of the building will go ahead.
So I just want to answer your question because you've asked it several times, and so has Mr. Shoebridge. We met with them in August. At the time we met with them in August, our proposal was to demolish Willow Grove and to also demolish St George's Terrace. We heard the concerns of the community. There was a very large number of people made submissions, most of them related to heritage. We listened to those submissions, including the CFMEU. And as I say, I mean, I heard the officials that day speak. I thought they spoke with, from the heart about their concerns and their members' concerns about heritage, and we took that on board. So we changed the design. We changed the proposal. So we've proposed now to not only keep St George's terraces, and if you've been there, you know it's in a great state of disrepair and I'd say disrespect for a heritage item. We're going to be investing in those buildings and keeping them on site, which was not the proposal before. And we're also proposing, as you've pointed out, to invest a significant amount of money in carefully dismantling and relocating the Willow Grove building to a site that's suitable for ongoing use of a heritage item in the Parramatta area, because that's the concern of people in Parramatta, is that there are a relatively few number of heritage items of that nature still left in Parramatta. I mean, if you go some parts of inner city, you might find a lot of those buildings, but in Parramatta there's relatively few left. And so we're investing a lot of time and money into ensuring that we meet the concerns of people expressed during the EIS process, including the union. And as I say, I don't think they would expect us to come to them and ask them what it's going to cost. We don't do that in any other project, but we've had a very, I think, amicable and respectful dialogue. We haven't met with them again to ask them what they think about the new proposals, but I'm sure they will tell us.
Well, the people of Parramatta have told you that they were appalled by the way the Royal Oak Hotel, one of their key heritage sites, was knocked down at midnight by your government, Minister, knocked down at midnight by your government for one of your projects. And now you're going to destroy another one of these key Parramatta heritage sites, Willow Grove, and destroy it for another one of your projects. The people of Parramatta are sick of their heritage constantly being destroyed because it's the cheapest way of delivering your projects. Well, what do you say to that?
I'll say this. I'm not familiar with the Royal Oak project because it's not one of my projects, but I'm aware of it.
3 years on the way to work.
I'm certainly aware of it. But in relation to Willow Grove, we've listened. We're keeping Willow Grove. The building will be faithfully reassembled and it will be in better condition than it is now and will be available for the people of Parramatta to use. We will consult them on where they want it and how they want to use it. And we will do that. And that will be a darn sight better than the way it was given to us by Parramatta Council, who didn't seem to care much at the time. Can I say that since we made the decision we made to move Willow Grove and keep St George's Terrace, the level of angst has dropped dramatically. There is enormous support for Parramatta, for this project in Parramatta, and I completely reject your characterisation of the views of Parramatta. And I think when you hear from the Parramatta Powerhouse Community Alliance later in the morning, you'll get some sense of just how much support there is for this project.
Minister, you used the term, I think, Mr. Draper, you used the term dismantling. Minister, I think you used the term reassembling Willow Grove.
Well,
it's nothing of the sort. It's been destroyed, and then a faux heritage item is going to be built at an indeterminate place at some point in the future. That's what's happening, isn't it?
Well, I'll tell you what was happening. Under Parramatta Council, you had dilapidation by neglect. Under this proposal, you have the building being reassembled, saved and made available for use by generations of local people.
Minister, you may have me to the extent...
generations of local
you may have me on this
point. To use in the future.
You may have me on this point to the extent that Parramatta Council, the majority on Parramatta Council, sold you Willow Grove at top dollar without any kind of limitation, on it. But Parramatta Council sold it to you at top dollar without any kind of limitation, and now retrospectively trying to sort out some heritage. You may have me on that argument, but on the idea that you are, dismantling and reassembling,
and further,
how much
David,
of the original heritage fabric will be left?
And further, David, if I may respond to the preamble in your question, at no stage have Parramatta Council asked for the site or Willow Grove back.
Yeah, well, as I said, you may have me on some of those arguments, Minister.
I have to say I did focus on that aspect of your question. If there was another one, would you mind asking it again?
How much of the original heritage fabric of Willow Grove will there be in the sort of Las Vegas Willow Grove that you recreate on the other side of the river?
Well, David, I know you're running for pre-selection, but, phrases like Las Vegas version
Las Vegas
is really
work
nonsense.
well amongst the
I can't help reflecting on the fact that we are sitting
Can you get him arrested
here
again?
at Parliament House, right, and immediately behind us is a building which is, frankly, one of the best examples of brutalist architecture.
But some cunning bureaucrat wanted to finish. Some cunning bureaucrat wanted to destroy
stop
this
interrupting
bit
me,
too.
David. I'm trying not to interrupt you, and I would ask you not to interrupt me either. And, that building was built after Richmond Villa went through exactly the same process as Willow Grove is now to go through. Richmond Villa was dismantled and reassembled, and frankly now looks fantastic down at Miller's Point. And the same thing will happen with Willow Grove at Parramatta. And to characterise it the way you have is just ludicrous and more of just a stunt for your own pre-selection.
How much
could I ask a question
how much of the
at
original
some point?
the question was
can.
That'd be lovely.
The question was how much of the original heritage fabric
about an
will be
hour.
left?
Yeah.
And we haven't got an answer yet.
Yeah. Thank you. Right.
Minister, what do Heritage New South Wales have to say about this?
10, 20, 30. What percentage of the original building will be there?
The building has been modified over the years to meet its changing use. Alterations, including bathrooms, doors, extensions, lights and flooring, are not expected to be retained. Modifications to meet modern and equitable access requirements will ensure that it can be used by all members of the community. The aim will be to rebuild the building with some minor modifications to meet those requirements. Detailed surveys, assessments and archival recordings of the building condition are in fact almost complete, with experienced heritage consultants and builders to determine the exact way it will be dismantled and rebuilt.
Minister,
What are you going to do in relation to its connection to country there on that site? Are you going to take the top layer of soil and move that as well, or something silly like that? I mean, that building has a connection to the Aboriginal community. How are you going to address that?
Yes, I'm aware of that. Kate, do you want to talk, or Simon, speak to that, or will we take that on notice?
Yeah, I think we've taken. I mean,
We'll
certainly
take that on notice and get you a proper response.
Yeah.
Because in fact, that's something that's also being worked on by Lisa. And as I said earlier, Lisa's not here at this hearing, and I'd rather get a proper response.
Minister,
Because it is an important issue. I agree with you. Rob.
Oh, sorry, Ben. Sorry, Ben.
Oh,
Sorry,
thanks.
Ben.
Sorry, just one quick question, if I might, Mr. Chair. Minister, I noted in your opening statement you talked about an excellent focus of mine, which is getting regional school students to utilise the new facility. You mentioned that in one sentence. Can you just unpack that a little bit more?
Well, look, I would
what's actually
encourage
happening?
you to ask Lisa that question when she comes, because that has been one of her initiatives.
Yeah, it's a great
and
one.
I think it is a tremendous one. I think there's
I don't really care.
in the. Sorry, Wal.
Sorry, sorry,
No, that's
we
quite
were
right.
having a...
No, it's all right. But it
Apologise.
was just distracting me a little. I'm not upset about it, but I just will just refocus now. So Lisa, it was one of her great ideas, and I really support it. I think there's been, frankly, some silly commentary in the media in the last 7 to 10 days describing them as apartments. It's really just, they're not. It's all about the capacity for kids from regional New South Wales to have a better experience when they come down and use its facilities. The academy is tremendous, but it's also not just for visiting school children, although that will be its primary purpose. It's also there to support research collaborations between the museum curators and subject experts, and Lisa can expand on that in more detail, but it's I think, exactly what you'd expect in a 21st century museum. And
Absolutely.
where museological practice should be.
And also all about the fundamental basis of where Create's going, which is about access.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Minister, when you were reading, Minister, when you were reading,
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do actually.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sure
thanks,
Walt
Bob.
didn't mean to.
You've
cut
been
you off.
butting in all morning.
I won't bite. Minister, I just want to pick up on the point that was made at the end of Mr Shoebridge's questioning around the heritage value of Willow Grove, because there was a tour that this committee went on of Willow Grove, and what was really striking to me was so many inclusions of modern additions throughout Willow Grove, and on top of things, just off the top of my head, vinyl flooring and fiberglass used throughout the bathrooms and whatnot. So to be clear, this will be restored back to somewhat original.
I think, to be fair, about the local heritage significance that council has placed upon Willow Grove, it's the significance is more about the story rather than the building fabric. The building is, frankly, it would never reach, and it has not, it would never reach state heritage significance assessment, because the building is just not significant. I mean, I was driving to Parramatta just recently. I think it was Church Street, Harris Park, that I drove along on that occasion as I was going up to Elizabeth Farm, I think. No, I think I'd just been to Elizabeth Farm, and we drove past two Victorian and Italianate houses, both of which were virtually identical to Willow Grove, both of which were in better condition. The building itself, let's be clear, is not particularly significant, but I do accept that lots of local people consider it important because of its story. And that's mainly due to its role briefly as a maternity hospital. I have to say, I do find being preached at by Labor Party people about destroying heritage a bit rich, when the maternity hospital that I was born in, which was a world-leading research hospital, was sold off by a previous Labor government to a property development for apartments. So I've always found that a bit curious, but that's perhaps a lateral move.
I don't think it's blaming you personally, Rose.
But look, I accept it is for those people in Parramatta important, just as Crown Street was, a little bit of sentimentality for me too. But that's the reality in terms of that building.
I agree. Crown Street Women's Hospital should have been listed as well, because I was born there too.
I was born there.
There you go. See, there you go.
It certainly was of local heritage.
So was Hornsby Hospital. Yeah.
No,
It's close to
but look,
heritage.
you've made a valid point. The building, had been compromised over the years, even more so, frankly, with St George's Terrace. But the story of the two mattered to the people of Parramatta, so we've made the changes we have, and I think we've done the right thing, and that's why I think there's now a vastly reduced level of concern about what's happening there, and in fact, what's been evidenced through the community access space that's been established in Parramatta Square is 95% of people who've been into the community access space have indicated they're excited and in favour of the project. And I believe now that we have development approval, now that a lot of the mistruths have been addressed through that SSDA process, now that preliminary work has started, people are going to get very excited about this museum, because it's just going to be a tremendous facility for Western Sydney, and indeed all of the state.
Well, Minister, did you not see the hundreds of messages that were put on Willow Grove just this last weekend? Pictures of people from their baby photos. They were born. No, let me finish. Pictures of their baby photos where they were born there. Messages from Darug elders on Willow Grove's gate and fence. Hundreds and hundreds of them. Did you not see any of those?
I did see references to them in the media, yes.
Did the preliminary
I'm aware of
works
that,
at
but the
7:30 this
decision has
morning
been-
involve removing those? Was that what you were referring
no.
to when you said preliminary
No, it
works this
wasn't.
morning? Was it the
No.
removal of those community messages?
No, actually, no, Rose.
So what's happened to the messages? Because they've all been taken down. It looks like an act of censorship, but they've all been taken down. Why were they taken down and what's happened to them?
Because work is beginning and hoardings are about to go up.
Minister,
What's happened to the messages? The baby photos of people, the
I'd be
messages from
very happy to make
Garagelders.
inquiries for you, David.
Minister, in your opening statement, you said that work had begun this morning at 7:30.
Yep.
So at daybreak, what work began at the site?
Fencing started.
So it was the removal of the community
No,
messages?
the photos I saw, in fact, were on the Wild Avenue side of the building.
Minister, you stand by, this is the first time I've actually heard you utter this, that you believe Willow Grove is not significant. Those are your words. This is the first
It's
time.
under the
state
definition of
significant.
state significance. Don't
Not
be unreasonable.
state
here.
significant. You do this all the time with respect, Walt. Really, honestly, you undermine your own credibility
Minister,
by
these are
just
your words.
lying about what people
I'm just
said.
recanting the evidence that you presented earlier.
No,
you said it is not
leaving out a
significant.
word to completely change the meaning. It's a bit like when you say, "Oh, Mike Baird said he'd build the Powerhouse for 10 million." Honestly, do you think that makes you more credible? Because all he
October
said,
2016,
what he
said he would do
actually
that.
said was that he was going to allocate $10 million for planning money to fund some business cases, and you go around saying it was going to cost that.
Minister,
it just makes you look silly.
we've
Walt,
gone
with
from
great
$10 million
respect. You
to
want to be shadow
1.7.
treasurer,
1.7.
and you just do things like that. I mean,
Minister.
how do you expect anyone to take you seriously, Walt?
Minister,
How do you expect anyone to take your government seriously when the announcement was made in February 2015? The only figure attached to it was $10 million. That was the only figure presented in February 2015 prior
And
to the
it was
election by
made-
Minister Baird. It's now
it was-
2021. Nothing has happened and it costs over $1 billion.
Oh,
How do you
Rose.
expect us to take you seriously?
Shouting doesn't make you right, Rose, with respect.
Maybe you will
it
get me an
was-
answer.
You get an answer even if you asked it without shouting, Rose.
Minister, answer the question.
Which of the 12?
The question that Rose asked me was to do with the $10 million. The $10 million, it was always made very clear it was for planning money.
Minister, the Ultimo site.
Yes.
You made much about a theatre being on the site. What has happened with your dream in relation to musical theatre?
Well, Walt, the situation with Ultimo is that a final business case is being prepared. Certainly back in April 2017, I think it was, when an announcement was made to retain the Ultimo House, actually, as in the historic building, as cultural space. I made a statement then that it would be investigated. In the context of the Ultimo business case.
4 years ago?
It's still being investigated.
4 years
and
later?
It has been investigated, I should say.
And what's the
therefore,
verdict of that investigation?
The final business case is going to the appropriate committee of cabinet shortly, and after that there'll be a statement that I'm able to make, and I'll address
Well, Minister,
that at that
what is the future of the Harwood building? What is the future of the Harwood building?
It has been considered as part of the Ultimo final business case. It's a matter that's going to go before a cabinet committee, and after there's been a discussion with my cabinet colleagues about it, then I'll make an announcement at the appropriate time.
Will that time be 5:45 p.m. on a Friday?
Minister, could I ask you about the conditions of consent regarding Willow Grove, to the extent that I assume you'll be responsible for them? What's the status of the relocation framework methodology plan?
Well, let's be clear, David. Infrastructure New South Wales is responsible for delivery of
Mr.
the project.
Draper.
Technically, of course, they report to the Premier, but the arts portfolio is certainly the client in terms of the project. So it's probably appropriate that if you have detailed questions, that they be directed to Simon.
Mr. Draper.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Shoebridge. So we only got the conditions of consent last week, so we're still working on those. But there's a number of requirements in the conditions. One of them is that no works on any heritage item can be done until the completion of archival photographic recording. That part of the work is largely complete, so we've already done that recording in anticipation that was going to be required. But there's a number of other elements to it.
B2 and D1 that I really want to focus on.
Yeah, that was B1 that I just referred to.
B2, as in
B2, yep. So
the second banana.
The second one is it says no works until there's a detailed relocation framework methodology plan. So that's all getting underway at the moment. Probably one of the most important first things we have to do is appoint a heritage specialist that meets the requirements of the department, and we've got a few people in mind for that. We haven't finalised that process yet. That will be really the commencement of most of those detail works on the engineering and heritage assessments, and there's a number of other elements that will have to be worked up with the assistance of that heritage specialist. So I think that's the threshold step for us to take.
Will you make the relocation framework methodology plan public at the time it's submitted to the planning secretary? Is there going to be any transparency here?
Yeah, look, that's probably a question really for the Department of Planning. We certainly would have no problem with it being public, but that's
it's your document. You can make it public.
Yeah, but I think would be respectful to the Secretary of Planning to ask them whether they think that it should be made public.
Why?
I mean, there's nothing. The planning process is a pretty transparent process, so I think I'll take it on notice and ask the Secretary of Planning if that's the intention. But we would normally, when we give something to the Department of Planning for planning purposes, show them the respect for them to make the decision about when it should be exhibited. They may say, that's not yet ready, we want you to do more work, we'll exhibit the one that's ready.
There's no requirement in the planning approval to rebuild Willow Grove, is there, Mr. Draper?
No, I think there is clearly a requirement in the planning consent to rebuild Willow Grove.
Show me the condition.
I think it's... So condition C1 is relevant. So C1 is prior to the commencement of construction of the built form of the museum, the applicant must submit to the planning secretary approval amended drawings. No, sorry, that's the wrong one.
The D1 I could help you with.
D1, yeah.
Does that help?
Right. So within 12 months, we have to update the methodology plan in consultation with the council, Heritage Council, community, key stakeholders, local landowners, managers, submitted to the planning secretary. And that must include the update of the details of the relocation site, program for a relocation process, including any additional approvals, opportunities for future use, and details of a consultation undertaken as part of that process.
That's as close as it gets, isn't it?
Well, when you consider that the submission that we've made to planning, which they have approved, included the relocation and reassembly of Willow Grove, I think it's pretty clear that the approval requires the rebuilding of Willow Grove.
That is,
Mr.
David,
Draper, sorry.
that's the approval that I've got. It's going to be done.
Mr. Draper, I've asked you to identify anywhere in the conditions a requirement to rebuild Willow Grove, and you've been unable to do so. And it's no blame on you, Mr. Draper,
right,
but it's
David.
because there is no requirement in the planning consent to rebuild Willow Grove, is there? There's none.
I don't know that we could occupy the building if we hadn't satisfied all these conditions.
Yep, none of which require the rebuilding of Willow Grove. We're not talking about the vibe here. We're talking about actual conditions.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to require Willow Grove be rebuilt.
No, but our proposal to the Department of Planning was for the rebuilding of Willow Grove.
But in their conditions of approval allowing you to destroy Willow Grove, there's nothing there requiring you to rebuild it, Mr. Draper. That's the point.
But, David, we put up a proposal to dismantle and then reassemble Willow Grove, and that has been approved.
No,
But the two documents need to be read in conjunction.
Let's
Of
be
course they
clear.
do. David,
Well,
it's just a semantic trick.
It is
you're trying
not.
to play.
There is no.
Yes, it
First of
is.
all,
it's just a
first of
stunt,
all-
another stunt on the way to your Senate pre-selection.
Minister, if you can say what you like about these substantive issues, but it does you no credit. Does you no credit at all. There is no requirement to rebuild Willow Grove. You have permission to destroy it, but no requirement to rebuild it. And you couldn't have a planning approval to rebuild it because you don't even know where you bloody well want to do it in the first place. That's the situation, isn't it, Mr.
Look,
Draper?
We have put a proposal to them to dismantle and reassemble.
Where?
They have said to us the steps they would like us to go through in terms of where it will go, and those steps include things like consulting the community, consulting the Heritage Council. Then we are to go back to them, and then they will tick it off, and that is part of the approval. It is, frankly, it beggars belief that you are trying to suggest this when you put together the proposal we put in and the approval we've received.
Minister, you're talking out your hat with all due respect.
No,
Well, show me the
that
condition.
it's you who are talking out.
Show me the condition
David.
now, on notice, at any point. Show me the condition anywhere that requires Willow Grove to be rebuilt.
I think
Mr. Draper
it's
can't
quite
because it's not
clear that in terms of reading the proposed, the application that we put in and the consent documents, including the one that we've had under discussion, D1, that there is an approval to dismantle and reassemble Willow Grove at a location within Parramatta local government area, and that is what we are going to do.
Well, Minister...
I couldn't be clearer.
Minister, you can call black white if you like, but there is nothing in this planning approval to
David,
require
with
the
respect,
rebuild.
it is
And
you
indeed,
who are calling black white.
Minister, well,
I think we've
if there wasn't,
canvassed this about as far as
yes.
we can take it, David.
Assuming there is an approval to rebuild Willow Grove, which I've got to say I fundamentally dispute, where are you rebuilding it?
Well, as you would be aware, because you appear to have read some, if not all, of the conditions of consent, there is a process that's been recommended by the Department of Planning, and that's what will follow, and that includes consulting the community.
How many suitable sites are there in the Parramatta local government area for this sort of rebuild?
There would be a number of suitable sites, and we will talk to the council about sites they may have, sites they suggest. We will talk to other people in the community about what their aspirations, but the state government also has holdings of land in the community, and no doubt several of them are suitable as well. The local Aboriginal Land Council has holdings in the area. There are lots of possible sites.
Minister, I'm mindful there are several minutes left in the inquiry in your session.
There is interpretation.
I ask you one last time,
1 minute.
how much will it cost to demolish or relocate Willow Grove? You cannot tell me that you have not undertaken work in this regard. How much will it cost?
Those questions have been asked by you already to the head of Infrastructure New South Wales, and he's responded to you.
You cannot. Can you say, hand on heart, that no financial
Given you a
work,
full answer.
no
Walt,
financial work has been
he's given
undertaken
you
in this
a
area?
full answer. There's nothing further to add.
Minister, please tell us how much it will cost.
Walt, you've asked that question already to the head of Infrastructure New South Wales. He's taken through all of the material, and he's given you an answer. There's nothing further that I need to add.
Any further questions?
Waiting for the bulb blow up.
I think
We've got
that's time.
Seconds on the clock. The cameras are here.
Thank you very much for coming,
Thank you
Minister.
very much.
Ms. Foy.
Thank you.
Mr. Draper. We'll now take a morning tea break and resume at 11 o'clock.